Well, for the last 4 weeks, we've been camped out at the foot of Mount Sinai. Now, the Israelites were there much longer, but we've been there for 4 weeks. And we've been talking about and remembering about the Israelites receiving the Ten Commandments from God after He freed them from slavery in Egypt. And we didn't just talk about receiving them, but we've been digging into them, right, to understand them a little deeper and to understand God's character through His giving of the Ten Commandments. Pastor Tim took a look at the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, and we learned that God was telling us who we are to worship. And then he also took a look at the second commandment, do not make yourself an image or an idol. And we learned that God was telling us how we are to worship. Then Pastor Tyler had the tough one. And he had the third commandment that says, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. But we learned that it was so much more than just about cussing. It's about God asking us, do we know who He really is? Do we know His character? And if we did, we probably wouldn't say some of the things we say. So the third question was, do we know who He is? And then last week, Pastor Tim talked about the fourth commandment, which was keeping the Sabbath day holy. And we learned that God was asking us, do we trust Him? So, do we know who we are to worship? Do we know how we are to worship? Do we know who He is? And then finally, do we trust Him? All those commandments, those first four commandments, all have to do with our relationship with God. And today, bless His heart, He's left 5 through 10 to cover in one sermon. But all those, Numbers 5 through 10, all have to do with our relationship with each other. But before I dig into this probably 3 or 4 hour long sermon to cover all 6 commandments, I want to take a look at why did God give us the 10 commandments in the first place? Actually, why did God give the Israelites the 10 commandments in the first place? You know, we often look at the 10 commandments as this bunch of don't do's. You know, don't do this, don't do that. I do, or I did, especially as a youngster. And it can mess up our view of who God really is when we think of it only in that realm, right? I've shared during Advent when I gave the message one time that I had this view of God when I was a child as this authoritative, putting His thumb down on me type of God, rather than the loving God that I now know who He is. But in reality, God gave the 10 commandments to the Israelites not to put His thumb down, not to limit them, not to restrict them, but to free them, to give them freedom. Now, if you think about it, God had just freed them from slavery, 400 years of slavery, 400 years. Now, today's a special day if you live in Ohio and you grew up rooting for a team towards Cincinnati, right? I heard you, Joe. So it has been 31 years since the Bengals won a playoff game, right? And we think that's a long time. Multiply that by 13, and you get 400 years, roughly. Think of it this way. It would be 5, maybe 6 generations of slavery. It would be as if my great-great-grandparents were slaves, and then my grandparents were slaves. I'm sorry, my great-grandparents were slaves, then my grandparents were slaves, then my parents were slaves, and then I'm the slave, and I get to be the one that God has freed. And I got to be honest with you, I had to do a family tree for my leadership focus class. I don't even know my great-great-grandparents' names. Slavery was all they knew. That's all they knew, 400 years. How would I have been taught anything different if my great-great-grandparents were the slaves? That's all they knew. They didn't know how to live without being told how to live. Think about this. If the 10 Commandments were really meant to limit them, if it was really meant to oppress them, God could have just left the Israelites in slavery. No, the Ten Commandments are not about limits. They are all about freedom. Who here knows the movie The Shawshank Redemption? I was going to say, if you don't, you can probably turn on the TV right now and find it somewhere on TV. It is on literally all the time. But in that movie, there is a character named Red who's played by Morgan Freeman. Now, I just find that hilariously ironic that an actor whose last name is Freeman plays a prisoner, which has nothing to do with my message, but I just find it ironic. Anyway, he's a prisoner. He gets paroled, and he gets out of jail or out of prison, and he goes to work as a bagger at a grocery store. Okay? And so there's a scene where he's bagging groceries, and he's doing really well. He's interacting with the customers really well, but he has to go to the bathroom, right? So he looks over at the manager and goes, boss, can I go to the bathroom? Manager calls him over. He goes, look, you don't have to ask when you need to go to the bathroom. Just go to the bathroom. And if you know the movie, Morgan Freeman kind of narrates throughout the entire movie, okay? So he goes on with his narration. When we pick up the next scene, he's washing his hands in the men's room. Now, I'm going to read this, but you have to hear it in the voice of Morgan Freeman. For 40 years, I've been asking permission to go to the bathroom. There's a hard truth to face. No way I'm going to make it on the outside. All I can think about is ways to break my parole, so maybe they'd send me back. Terrible thing to live in fear. All I want is to be back where things make sense, where I won't have to be afraid all of the time. Think about the life of a slave, making bricks and building these huge buildings for the Pharaoh for 400 years. They had structure in their life. They were told when to eat. They were told when to sleep. And yes, they were probably told when to go to the bathroom. Now, don't get me wrong. It was a hard life. It was a miserable life. But they were well taken care of. And like Red, the Israelites are now saying, there's no way we're going to make it on the outside. All we can think about are ways of how to go back where things make sense. Don't believe me? Listen to these situations, how the Israelites reacted to various situations on their way to Mount Sinai, right? Since the time they were free until they got to Mount Sinai to worship God at the mountain. Just before crossing the Red Sea on dry ground in Exodus 14, 11, and 12, they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die? It would have been better to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. And then when there was no food to eat, we looked at this last week, when just before God provided manna and quail in Exodus 16, the Israelites said to Moses and Aaron, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out in the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. And when they were thirsty, Moses was just about to strike the rock to have water flow out of it. In Exodus 17, they said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? They did not know how to act. They did not know what to do. They just wanted to go back where things made sense. So here are the Israelites, right? They're on their way, or maybe they're at the mountain. No one is there to tell them or show them how to live in freedom. So God gives them a gift. And this is a gift of love, and a gift of mercy, and a gift of grace. God gives them a gift of structure, because God did not want them to go back into slavery. He wanted them to be free. He tells them on the way, actually while they were still in Egypt and also on the way, that he's made a promise with them. He's going to make them his people, and he will be their God. He doesn't want them back in Egypt. He doesn't want them being oppressed. He doesn't want that thumb down. He wants to give them freedom. So he gives them this gift of structure in the Ten Commandments. A structure to live within that's going to keep them free. So the whole purpose of the Ten Commandments is to provide this new rhythm to life, to show the Israelites then and you and me now how to treat each other, how to love each other. They never really had to before. All they had to do was answer to the taskmasters. Okay? You guys with me? We're on the same page? That the Ten Commandments are not a limitation. It is freedom, a structure to live within. So let's dig into Numbers 6 through 10. We're going to start with, it's number 5 through 10. Let's start with number 5, which is found in Exodus 20:12. God tells us this: honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. And when I first look at this commandment, I have to think about, well, what does honor really mean? What does honoring look like? Does it mean love? Does it mean respect? I have to kind of chuckle because when I was a kid, my mom used to say, you don't have to love me, but you will respect me. Does it mean obedience? Well, all three of those things, love, respect, and obedience, those are kind of our outward actions, right? Those are how we live, how we're interacting with people. But I think honor is more about our attitude or our heart of the way we approach people. It's the way we posture ourselves when we're interacting with our mother and our father. I believe honor is saying, I will value you because you are worthy to be valued. It's that simple. Other words that come to mind would be to lift up. I will lift you up. I will hold you in high esteem. I will submit to you. And this commandment, oftentimes we think that this commandment is just for the little children, right? Couldn't be farther from the truth. Actually, obviously, all the commandments. We talk about the 10, but did you know there's 613 of them in the Old Testament? We talk about all the commandments are obviously for all people of all ages, right? And I think of my relationship with my mom today as an adult when I think about honoring your mother and your father. So my older sister lives in Grand Rapids, Ohio, which is about a half hour west of Toledo. And my younger sister, before she passed, she lived outside of Canal Winchester. Believe it or not, Canal Winchester has a suburb called Lithopolis, Ohio. There are actually still log cabins in Lithopolis, Ohio. It is dinky. But anyway, which is about a half hour southeast of Columbus. My mom lives here in Sydney. So guess what? I'm her caregiver, her primary caregiver. And what that means is I take her to get her hair done. I take her to her doctor's appointments. I take her to the grocery or to Walmart. I take her trash out every Tuesday afternoon or evening. When something's not working right on the TV, I grab the remote and try to figure it out. Or if she can't get a document off of her iPad, I help her. The thing about it is, Mom is obsessed about paying me to do these things, especially for gas to take her to her appointments. Now, she lives on the north end of town. She gets her hair done on the north end of town. It is literally a 2-minute drive. She doesn't have to pay me for gas to take her to go get her hair cut. And she thanks, and Deb, you're part of this as well. She will thank us over and over and over again. And you know what my response to her is? Mom, you took care of me for 18, maybe 21 years of my life. I don't need anything in return. I don't expect anything in return. I do this simply because you're my mom. And I want to honor you this way. I don't expect or feel I need anything in return. Is it always peaches and cream? Maybe I should ask Deb that. Is it always peaches and cream? Nope. Do I get frustrated? Often. Um, have I or do I dishonor her from time to time? Sadly, that answer would be yes. Let me give you an example. So 2-3 weeks ago, my mom had 4 appointments. She had one on Tuesday, 2 on Thursday. Now, they were back to back at the same place, but still 2 appointments, and then 1 on Friday. So 4 appointments in 1 week. It happened to be the week we had 2 funerals here at church. I was preparing the message for Snyder Road, and of course, I had to prepare for those messages, for those funerals. Okay? So I was having a rather hectic, overwhelming week. And, oh, by the way, Pastor Tim decided to get COVID, and so he wasn't here. So I tell Mom, I'm not going to be able to take you to your dentist appointment on Tuesday because the funeral is during that time. She goes, okay, no problem, I'll reschedule. I said, great. You know when she rescheduled it for? Wednesday. Now here's where the dishonor comes into play. So I said, oh, okay, I'll figure it out. I'll get everything done that I need to get done. I'll make it work somehow. The problem was I said it just like that to my mom. And you know how I know I dishonored her? She asked her neighbor across the street to take her not only to her dentist appointment that had been rescheduled from Tuesday to Wednesday, but also to her Friday appointment. So why is honoring our father and our mother so important? Why did God make this the first commandment about our relationship with others? Well, think about this. The family relationship, in particular the parent-child relationship, is the only relationship that was actually created by God. After creating Adam and Eve, God said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. God was telling them to have children. This was the only relationship that God actually created, that he ordained. And think about this. God specifically chose you to be your mother and father's child, and specifically chose your mom and dad to be your mom and dad. In Harper Lee's book, To Kill a Mockingbird, there's a character named Jem, and he says this: you can choose your friends, but you sure can't choose your family, and they're still kin to you no matter whether you acknowledge them or not, and it makes you look right silly when you don't. So take out the word acknowledge and put in the word honor. It makes you look right silly when you don't honor your family, your mom, and your dad. You see, being this relational unit that has been ordained by God makes it the foundation for every other relationship we're going to enter into throughout our lifetime. If we mess up this one, there's a good chance we're going to mess up other ones. You see, when we learn to honor our parents, we learn to honor our other family members and our friends and our neighbors and our coworkers and our acquaintances and our enemies. We learn to honor everyone. It doesn't mean we have to like them. It doesn't mean we won't be frustrated by them. It doesn't mean we have to agree with them or condone their actions. But we are to honor them. God created us, all of us, in his image. In his image. So everyone is worthy to be honored. Right? We honor someone simply because they are value and they are worthy to be honored. And when we don't honor them, what we're doing, we're saying, I don't see God in you, so therefore you don't deserve my honor. And I don't believe that's what God is asking of us. If we really truly did see God in everyone, then we wouldn't treat him that way. And you see, in those situations, when we don't treat someone properly, honestly, we're not living in the freedom of being a child of God. We're living in bondage of being selfish and our own selfish ways. And I have to do a little confession in that sometimes is me. And it may have been with some of you on a Sunday morning. I tend to be task-oriented. No chuckles from this side of the room. I'm surprised. Thank you. I tend to be very task-oriented. So if I'm to do something on a Sunday morning, I'll go do it. And I may run right past you. Or run over you. Todd, we can set up a counseling session later on. But the point is, that's dishonoring you because I'm not seeing God, the image of God in each and every one of you. Every one of you, every one of us deserves to be honored like we would honor God. And did you notice that this is the only commandment that actually God offers a promise for keeping it? It's the only one of the 10 commandments that he offers a promise. He says, value your parents through the way you honor them, through the way you treat them, so you don't go back to slavery, so you stay free. Because he says, so you will live long in the land that I am giving you. He doesn't want us to go back to bondage. He doesn't want us to go back to slavery. He wants us all to stay free. And one last thought on this command. And I know it's a long one, so that's why I told you to be here for a few hours, because 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 take just as long. I'm only kidding. One last thought. You might be asking, well, what if both of my parents have passed? Does this mean that I don't have to worry about this commandment anymore? Well, the obvious answer is absolutely not. My dad passed away 19 years ago, and I can still honor him today, and I do still honor him today by remembering and telling others about who he was in my life and how we did things together and how he instilled certain values in me. Maybe when your parents were alive and if they have passed, maybe you didn't honor them the way you should have. Well, you can honor them today by praying for forgiveness, by praying that you don't carry on the same type of attitude that you had in your relationships with others. Or maybe you're saying, you know what, I don't think I can do it. I can't honor my dad because he abused me when I was a kid. Or I can't honor my mom because she abandoned me as a baby. First of all, let me just say this. If you find yourself in that situation, my heart grieves for you. I can't imagine what that has to be like. But I'm also here to tell you, you can still honor your mother and your father. It doesn't mean you're condoning what they did. But you can still honor them. And maybe that's by prayer. By praying that God would change their hearts to make sure they don't do this, repeat their behavior. Maybe it's again, asking for a forgiving heart. So your heart is more like the heart of God. Again, so you don't repeat with other relationships. All right. Enough on honoring our mother and our father. Not that it's ever enough, because it's a direct reflection of how we are going to honor God, right? Because we see God in everyone. Okay? But let's move on to the next 4. Looking at commandments 6 through 9, I truly hope that you can see that murder and committing adultery and stealing and giving false testimony or lying about someone is not a good way to live, and it's certainly not a godly way to live. And if you think about it, even those negative comments, don't do this, don't do that, still provide freedom, right? By forbidding stealing, we're free to possess property. By forbidding murder, everyone is free to live. And if you think about it, if we had total freedom is basically doing whatever you want, whatever you see is right in your own eyes without any structure at all. If we had that, you would have total disregard for what anyone else thought. You would have no responsibility for any of them, and we would have chaos. And there's no freedom in chaos. So let's move on to commandment number 10, which is found in Exodus 20, verse 17. God tells us, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." Now, much like honor, covet is a word that we don't use very often. And if we do, we probably or possibly don't really understand what it means, and it can be confusing. So I want to start there. What is coveting really? Well, coveting is more than simply wanting something that we don't have. Coveting is actually wanting something that someone else has. But I think it even goes beyond wanting, because I could easily say, "Oh, I really like Marty's car. I want Marty's car," when I have no intentions of really taking it from him, right? So it's even more than that. Coveting is a craving or a desire that cannot be satisfied. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines covet as to desire what belongs to another beyond reasonable limits. And as I was looking up what covet meant, I came across this definition that I really liked. To grasp for more, an ungoverned selfish desire so strong that it compels someone to violate another person's property. Now, this commandment is actually different from the rest because it deals with our intentions and not necessarily our outward actions. It's, do we have the intent to do whatever it takes to get that? Is it our intent that because our craving can't be satisfied, that we're going to go ahead and take whatever isn't ours? And God gives us three areas, if you will, three things that we should not covet. And let me go back real quick and say that if you remember, last week we talked about God asking us to trust Him. I think this commandment, God is asking us, are we content with everything He provides for us? Because it's when we're not content that we're coveting. Coveting is believing the myth that you always need more. The opposite is being content and wanting what God wants for us rather than what we want for us. So if you are coveting, you're basically telling God, what you are providing for me is not enough. And my intention is to go get what I want. I don't care whose it is. So now let's look at the three things that God tells us we are not, actually four things that God tells us we are not to covet. First thing is property, because He says, do not covet your neighbor's house. I think of property, I think it's not only the house, but it's the land and all that goes with it. Second of all, He says, do not covet people, right? His wife or his male or female servants. So we are not to covet property, we are not to covet people, and we're not to covet possessions, his ox and his donkey. And I think that can even be taken a little bit further in that when we think of ox and donkey, in those days, that would have been the way someone provided for their family because they tilled the ground, they did the hard work, right? So in addition to material wealth, material possessions, I believe that God is telling us, hey, you know what? Don't covet that person's job or career or status or title. All right? And just in case you think, oh, I can think of something that doesn't fit into one of those three categories, God closes the gap for you when he says, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So, nice try. And since this commandment, we talked about this briefly, since this commandment is aimed at your attentions, you can actually break this commandment and no one will know except for you and God. Now, I would guess more often than not, when we are coveting, when we are truly coveting, when we have that selfish desire that can't be satisfied, when we're going to do anything we can to satisfy that craving, we outwardly break one of the other commandments. I think of King David. If you want to not follow along because I'm not going to read it, but if you want to go back and look at this story in more depth, it's found in 2 Samuel chapter 11. It's a story of David and Bathsheba. And the real quick synopsis is basically David's army is away in battle. He stayed back in Jerusalem. He's up on top of his palace roof, and he sees this woman from across the way bathing, and he starts coveting her. So much so that he actually sends for her and commits adultery with her. So there's the first time an outward act was broken, right? He committed adultery. Okay? Then she becomes pregnant. So David's got to cover his tracks, so he calls her husband. I forgot to tell you, she was married. Calls her husband back home, tries to get him to have relations with her so that it could look like it was his kid. Doesn't work out that way. So he sends him back and tells his commander, put him on the front line. And sure enough, Uriah was his name, gets killed. Now David's committed murder. Okay, Pastor Mark, that's biblical. I get it. Let me bring it a little bit closer to home for you. Several of you, well, probably many of you, because I told it not too long ago, know my story. I had a very severe problem with coveting. And I coveted the corner office. I coveted success. I coveted the status that went with it. It wasn't really even so much about the salary. It was about the status and the position and the title that went with it. Okay? And literally throughout my career, I would do anything to get that promotion. I would do anything to make myself look good to get to the next step, to get to the corner office. Then I went to work for the Y. I was in fundraising, okay? We did this huge fundraising campaign, and the YMCA raised a lot of money for it. It was community-wide. There were other organizations involved in the campaign as well, raising money for their nonprofit organizations. And there's this big celebration at the library. The community leaders were involved. The community foundation was there. Everyone was there. Anyone who was anyone, right, was there. And so they'd call up each organization one by one. They called up the YMCA. I hopped up. It was my campaign. At the same time, our CEO, who was sitting, I don't know, halfway across the room, hopped up too. And I'm going, well, what's he getting up for? He had nothing to do with this. The problem was, I over-exaggerated my surprise. I couldn't believe he was doing this to me. How could he do this? This was my campaign. Now, I didn't say it that way, but just my actions and my expression did that. You see, I committed an outward act as a result of my coveting. I guess you could say I murdered Ed that day. Now, I didn't physically take his life, but even leading up to that day, I murdered his reputation. I murdered his leadership abilities or relations with the rest of the staff. Because if I saw someone talking about him, and a lot of people talked about him, because I felt I could do his job better than he could, I'd add fuel to the fire. Sometimes I'd have the conversations on my own with someone. Can you believe he did that? Oh my goodness, what was he thinking? Why didn't he do this? And then, at that community event, when I, over-exaggerated, I humiliated him publicly and murdered his reputation. So, when you think you want something, be careful, because it can act out in other ways. So honor your mother and your father. Do not murder, commit adultery, steal, lie, and don't covet. It's a dangerous, slippery slope. So the question often comes up, okay, Pastor Mark, I shouldn't say often comes up, it might be in your mind right now. God gave the Ten Commandments to the Israelites because he didn't want them to be in freedom or in slavery. He wanted them to stay free. What about us today? Do the Ten Commandments even still apply today? Well, I've shared enough stories. I think you can see that they do. But let me just remind you that at one point in Jesus' ministry, the Pharisees asked him this. It's found in Matthew 22. Starting in verse 35, it says, one of them, an expert in the law, tested him, meaning tested Jesus, with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? It's a trick. I told you there are 613 commandments. And they're saying, which one is the most important one? And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. But he doesn't stop. I can hear Jesus. He probably ran right on to the next statement. And the second is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets, that's basically the entire Old Testament, all of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. First four, love your God. Last six, love your neighbor. Love God, love others. They totally still apply to us today. So I'm going to invite Jess back up as I wrap up. I'm going to leave you with two. Wow. I'm going to leave you with two questions. And it's really two sets of questions. First of all, do you see God in everyone you interact with? Are you honoring others with your words and your actions simply because they are worthy to be honored? Simply because they are worthy to be valued as a child of God. Not because they've done something for you and you feel you have to pay them back. Simply because they are created in God's image. And my second question is, are you content with everything that God's providing for you? All right? Father God, we thank you for all your commandments. We thank you that you desire to keep us free with this structure that we call the Ten Commandments. This gift of your love and your mercy and your grace, so that not only do we honor you, which is so, so, so important, but Lord, that we also learn how to honor each other. You know, I can think of no greater thing than to love you, Lord, and to honor you. But Lord, you're teaching us that we express that in how we love each other. You tell us in the scriptures in the Gospel of John, a new command I give you, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciple, that you love one another. Oh, Father God, may we take what we have heard today and over the last 5 weeks, Lord, and bury it deep in our heart and live a life that shows that we have freedom in you as your child. In Jesus' name we pray.